Before we proceed, I would like to make it clear that my intention here is not to validate or debunk the claim of the Ashanti people being Hebrews or Israelites. That is not my focal point. Rather, I aim to rectify any misinformation, educate, and in doing so, address the prevailing dogma surrounding this topic. If necessary, we can delve into this specific subject. Therefore, I kindly request all defenders or advocates of the Ashanti in my comments to concentrate on the content of the video and refrain from assuming my stance. This situation reminds me of an old African proverb that states, "When bones are the subject of discussion, the old woman shivers." With this said, let's get scholarly. No dogmas. Now, this is the first time I've taken an interest in this book, Hebrewisms of West Africa, displayed on your screen. And it's truly captivating. I must say, it's incredible. The discussion about the Ashanti particularly intrigued me. Upon researching, I noticed a lack of critical reviews from those who base their claims of being Israelites on this work. It appears that many who endorse this book do so based on a strong dogma. As an author myself, having written and published numerous books, I must acknowledge the author of Hebrewisms of West Africa for their dedication and work. Hats off to them. But when it comes to writing books, authoring books, one crucial aspect I've learned as an author is the significance of focusing not only on what an author includes, but also on what they deliberately leave out, what they omit. While most readers may pay attention to the content written, those well-versed in the subject matter often consider what the author consciously excludes. This leads me to initiate a critical review of the book, Hebrewisms of West Africa, starting with the author's omissions regarding the Ashanti assertions. I repeat that. I am going to critically review this book, but I'm going to start with the author's omissions regarding the Ashanti assertions. Let's get our foundational text. Genesis 17. And God said to Abram, "As for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised. Every male throughout your generations, whether born in your house or bought with your money from any foreigner who is not of your offsprings, both he who is born in your household and he who is bought with your money shall surely be circumcised. So shall my covenant be in your flesh, an everlasting covenant." This is 14. An uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. I believe these are very clear words from the God of the Hebrew Bible, the God of the Israelites. Let's jump to verses 22. When he had finished talking with him, God went up from Abraham. Then Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all those born in his household, or bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and he circumcised the flesh of their foreskin that very day, as God had said to him. What do we have here? God enters into a significant covenant with Abraham, known as the covenant of circumcision, a pivotal sign of Hebrew lineage. The act begins with Ishmael, followed by others in Abraham's household, with Abraham being the last to undergo circumcision. Each detail mentioned in the narrative is crucial, as circumcision holds deep cultural and religious importance for the Israelites, or Hebrews. What is astonishing is the lack of emphasis on this vital ritual among the Ashanti people in the book Hebrewisms of West Africa, a book which seeks to establish the Ashantis as Hebrews. I'll repeat that statement. I'm saying that it's astonishing the lack of emphasis on this vital ritual, that is circumcision, among the Ashanti in the book Hebrewisms of West Africa, a book which seeks to establish the Ashanti as Hebrews. Now, despite delving extensively into various aspects of Ashanti life and culture as evidence, including references to Jamaica Obia, Semitic influences, religious practices, and more, the absence of any mention of circumcision among the Ashanti people is glaring. Now, this is the list of things the author talks about on the screen in his book about the Ashanti people. It's quite extensive. And yet, the author shies away from mentioning circumcision. He talks about, as I mentioned, Jamaica Obia, linking it to Obeyfor. He talks about Semitic influences. He even talks about Amen. He talks about vowel values. He talks about patriarchal systems. He talks about marriage rites. He talks about uncleanness after childbirth, purification ceremonies, menstrual seclusion, ceremonial ablution. He talks about nyame. He references a breastplate. He talks about Tano. He even talks about the Feast of Tabernacle. He mentions the chair of Elijah, which has something to do with circumcision in the Jewish context. And even within discussions of marriage customs, postnatal practices, menstrual seclusion, and religious ceremonies, the author overlooks circumcision, a practice that would logically align with the context. So when he mentions marriage customs, when he talks about postnatal practices, when he talks about menstrual seclusion, you would think that ideally circumcision will be mentioned in this context, but it is not. Now, This omission raises questions about why such a central ritual is omitted from a detailed account that touches on numerous cultural elements of the Ashanti people. Despite the author discussing circumcision multiple times, he mentions circumcision 10 times. I counted. None of these references pertain to the Ashanti people. This discrepancy begs the question: why the absence of such a significant aspect in a narrative aiming to connect the Ashanti to Hebrew or Israelite traditions? Why the absence of such a significant aspect? It's a covenant in a narrative aiming to connect the Ashanti to Hebrew traditions. Now, when you encounter Ashanti men today, you would observe that a significant number of them undergo circumcision on the 8th day or have already been circumcised. This observation often leads to a mistaken assumption linking the practice of circumcision to Hebrew origins among the Ashanti people. However, the reality is quite different. Historically, the Ashanti did not traditionally practice circumcision. I'll repeat that again. Historically, the Ashanti people did not traditionally practice circumcision. The adoption of this practice required a deliberate and sometimes challenging shift influenced by external factors, rather than being an inherent cultural tradition. This explains why the author of Hebrewisms of West Africa does not include it as supporting evidence in his work. Now let's get historical. Certain historians have posited that circumcision served as a religious ceremony reserved for royalty, while others suggest it was a symbol of servitude. Interestingly, the latter perspective mirrors the traditional Ashanti beliefs prior to the introduction of circumcision by Muslim wanzams. Yes, it was Muslim wanzams. Those who are African or Ashantis or Ghanaians know who a wanzam is. I'll explain shortly. But on record, historically, this is a historical fact. Circumcision was introduced to Ashanti by Muslim wanzams. A wanzam, which derives from a Hausa term, refers to a traditional male circumcision specialist or a traditional male circumcision surgeon. Women, now you have women who do it, but traditionally it was something that males did. Muslim male surgeons. Let me repeat that again. I know you did not hear me the first time. Let me repeat it. The traditional Ashanti belief prior to the introduction of circumcision by Muslim wanzams was that circumcision served as a symbol of servitude. The notion that circumcision equated to scarring or mutilation suitable only for those not of noble birth remained unchallenged by the Ashanti people until the dawn of the 20th century in Ghana. I will take that again. I'm giving you the facts. The notion that circumcision equated to scarring and mutilation, suitable only for those not of noble birth, remained unchallenged by the Ashanti people until the dawn of the 20th century in Ghana. It is worth noting that historical records indicate the introduction of circumcision in Ashanti was not of local origin, but rather imported entirely from Muslim physicians and settlers in the region. Unlike in other cultures where circumcision marked a rite of passage from childhood to adulthood, Ashanti's case differed significantly. The adoption of circumcision by young men in Ashanti faced strong opposition from older men. Remember, the first person circumcised in Abraham's household was Ishmael. Now, considering that Muslims trace their lineage back to Ishmael, it suggests that they are the ones to introduce this significant practice to the Ashanti people. Let's focus on these Muslim physicians, these Muslim wanzams. When you take a broader view, it is recognized that non-herbal medicine, predominantly a Muslim tradition, was brought to Ashanti by Muslim practitioners even before the early 20th century. Bonat documented an account from a Muslim individual in Berna who mentioned the presence of Muslims in Kumasi, serving as esteemed physicians to the Ashanti. Let's look at the source. So we're going to be looking at the 19th century Ashanti medical practices. We're going to go to page 11. And I'm going to read from the last paragraph onwards. To establish the relationship between the Ashanti Nkremo and Nsumankwahine and the Ashanti is important because many of the non-herbal methods of medical treatment in use in the 19th century Ashanti, example, lancing, cupping, bleeding, etc., are quite common methods of Muslim medicine, some even being mentioned in the Quran. And it is possible that these methods were introduced to Ashanti by Muslim physicians. According to the Nsumankwa stool history, the first Ashanti Nkremo imam was Kremotia, brought to Kumasi as a captive from Daboya after a successful campaign they led by Nsumankwahine Nana Bonfi Ketewa. Because of the Nsumankwahine's role in capturing Kremotia, and because Kremotia knew a lot of medicine, the Ashanti Kwekudua I placed him under the authority and patronage of the Nsumankwahine. Stranger Muslims were already in Kumasi by the early 19th century when Bodish and Dubious visited there. But Kremotia was officially recognized as first imam and assigned to serve the Ashanti through the Nsumankwa stool. The Muslim connection with the advance of Ashanti medicine is strongly supported by the sources. Oral informants stated that Prempe did have Muslim advisors who attended to his children and healed them. While in captivity in Kumasi from 1865 to 1874, J. Bonat recorded a Muslim from Buna who stated that Kumasi contains a large number of Muslims who had come, like me, from the interior. They fill in general and functions of doctors to the king, who holds them in high regard. There you have it. Within this group of Muslim practitioners who settled in Ashanti, particularly by the onset of the 20th century, were Wanzams, specialized in circumcision. It has been clarified that both Ashanti Kremo and Muslims played pivotal roles in introducing various non-herbal treatments in the 20th century, including circumcision. However, prior to this era, circumcision was frowned upon in Ashanti and especially in Kumasi due to its negative implications. The Ashanti Odishie, that is a royal figure, refrained from undergoing any form of mutilation. They considered circumcision as mutilation as well. Now, Donko elaborates on this stance. He tells us, first-generation slaves often faced discrimination based on their linguistic differences, reflected in their hesitant or accented Twi. Additionally, they were often identified by scarification. Typically, individuals of noble birth avoided physical markings, including scarification and circumcision, viewing them as forms of mutilation. This is the source. Now, one can deduce from Donko's stance that individuals from outside the Ashanti community residing within Ashanti engaged in circumcision. It is through intermarriages between Muslims and the Ashanti population that circumcision became more entrenched within the Ashanti society by the early 1900s. It was through this cohort. During the first half of the 20th century in Ashanti, it was prohibited for a chief, that is, an Odishie, to undergo circumcision, as this act was considered a breach of a long-standing circumcision taboo. For young Ashanti boys growing up in Kumasi during this period, disdain towards circumcision was prevalent. However, the influence of intermarriages and Islamic culture within Ashanti society during the same era led to an increasing number of indigenous individuals embracing circumcision. Notably, a shift occurred as young girls from the Edum suburb of Kumasi began advocating for change. These girls expressed their sentiments through what some would consider provocative or profane songs, urging their male counterparts to undergo circumcision by emphasizing the perceived importance of the practice in relationships and marriage. So the girls were not advocating for the boys or the men to be circumcised because the Torah said so, because they were Hebrews. No. The girls expressed their sentiments through what some would consider profane songs. This is what the girls sang. According to Amaah, an uncircumcised penis is detestable, and those who have not circumcised should come for money from us, so that they can get circumcised. We shall never marry the uncircumcised. The source is on your screen. This is a song that Ashanti women sang, urging their male counterparts to undergo circumcision. They are not singing it because they are Hebrews. They are not singing it because they are Israelites. The prevalence of circumcision in Ashanti during the first half of the 20th century was largely attributed to the influx of Hausa Muslims to this region in 1898, introducing the practice to the Ashanti community. Young women were willing to finance the circumcision of their male counterparts as they deemed an uncircumcised penis unappealing. Not because they were Hebrews, not because it's in the Bible, or it was commanded to Abraham. The motivation behind circumcision at that time was more about cultural aesthetics than medical necessity. It looked more decent to the Ashanti women. What we know is that the Ashanti society displayed openness to adopting foreign customs, including circumcision. The initiation of circumcision among Ashanti boys was conducted discreetly, often under the cover of secrecy. Piaget is the source. We now grasp the reason for the omission by the author of Hebrewisms of West Africa. It's clear why such a significant ritual is excluded from a comprehensive narrative that explores various cultural aspects of the Ashanti. We now comprehend why, despite the author mentioning circumcision multiple times, 10 times, none of these mentions relate to the Ashanti people. The question then is, were the other tribes that lived alongside the Ashanti people circumcised? Let me narrate a historical account to your hearing. Let's look at the Ga people, specifically Gamashi, for a moment. The leader of the group, dating back to the 1500s, was Ni Ayi Kushi. Ayi Kushi's lineage continued with Ayite, who followed in his footsteps. Ayite was succeeded by Mangpolo Okain. Mangpolo Okain, later known as Mampong Okain, bastardized as Mampong Okain, due to his victorious battles. It was during Mangpolo Okain's reign that the Portuguese first arrived on our shores. Engaging in trade with the Portuguese, they honored him with a wheeled chair for mobility instead of a traditional palanquin. Due to his interactions with the Portuguese, Mangpolo Okain often dressed similarly to them, earning the title Owula Mankpolo Okai, with Owula signifying gentleman. His royal court reflected grandeur. At that period, the Ga people monopolized the gold trade, and their realm, which is the kingdom of Ayiwaso, what we know as Ayawaso today, stood as the most dominant among the southern states. Now, Nikwe Ola succeeded Mankpolo Okai. Mankpolo Okai's wife hailed from Obutu and was named Dode Akaibi. She bore a son named Okainkwe. This young boy was still in his youth when his father, Mankpolo Okai, passed away. As a result, the elders governed in his place until Okainkwe matured and could assume leadership. The domain under King Okainkwe's authority were extensive. The kingdom of Ayiwaso, reaching from Langma to Shulao, to Tete, Tutu in Dahomey, modern-day Benin, and stretching along the coast all the way to Yilo Krobo. King Okainkwe had sons who displayed unruly and spirited behaviors, reflecting their inadequate upbringing. Among them was Ashongbo, one of King Okainkwe's sons. On a particular day, I'm telling it in a story form, so bear with me. On a particular day, King Okainkwe received a visitor named Akwamu, accompanied by his wife and extended family from a distant land, seeking land for settlement. Due to their non-Ga lineage, King Okainkwe was advised to allocate land at the base of the Nyanao mountain for Akwamu's settlement to maintain distance from the Ga people. So Akwamu settled in the area, multiplied in numbers, and initiated trade with the locals of Ayiwaso. Relations also improved between Achim and Akwamu, fostering increased commerce among the three regions. That is, Ayiwaso, Akwamu, and Achim. At one point, the Akwamus presented their son, named Ode, to the king of Ayiwaso, intending to educate him in royal traditions. However, a complication arose as all male children among the Ga people were traditionally circumcised. We are talking about the 1600s. So, there was a complication. Ode, an Akwamu prince, has been brought to the Ga court to be trained, educated. However, we have an issue, because all male children dating back to this time among the Ga people were traditionally circumcised. Since Ode from Akwamu, a prince, was uncircumcised, he couldn't gain entry into the king's court. To resolve this, King Okainkwe ordered his circumcision. This decision led to tensions as the Akwamus protested that the act tarnished their royals, their prince status, demanding for the foreskin so that a fetish priest could attach it, because it prevented the prince from sitting on the Akwamu stool as a king. When the Ga people couldn't produce the foreskin, the Akwamus, alongside some of the king's owned captains, waged war against the people of Ayi Waso because of circumcision. Let's look at the source in the rise of the Akwamu Empire, 1650 to 1710. We're going to read from page 8. Akwamu launched its major offensive against Accra in 1677 under the able leadership of the great Akwamuhene, Ansa Sasraku. Romer gives an account of what may just possibly have been the immediate justification for the attack. An Akwamu prince, Akwetey was a name that they gave to him after he was circumcised by the Ga. This was a derogatory name. Okay. An Akwamu prince, Akwetey, had been sent to the Accra court, where it may be presumed that he was expected to learn the ways of the European trade and something of the Portuguese language, then the lingua franca of the coast, as it was to be until late in the 18th century. The Accras, that are the Ga people, after their fashion, had the young prince circumcised. Read very carefully. The Accras, that is the Ga people, we're looking at 1677. The Accras, after their fashion, what is their fashion? As I told you, we circumcise our male children, and you have to be circumcised even to come into the king's court. So Romer is telling us that the Ga people, that is the Accras, after their fashion, had the young prince circumcised, which was not only contrary to Akwamu's usage, but would presumably debar him from any Akwamu stool. The Akwamus, ironically, demanded the return of Akwetey's foreskin, with a fetish priest to replace it in its proper place. The Accras, that is the Ga people, appeared to have been unable to satisfy this demand, and thus Akwamu determined upon war. So you see that their neighbors were circumcised. We, the Accra people, we, the Ga Dangbe people, we were practicing circumcision. The Ashantis, the Akans, were not. So, again, we now grasp the reason for the omission. It's clear why such a significant ritual is excluded from a comprehensive narrative that explores various aspects, cultural aspects of the Ashanti people. We now comprehend why, despite the author mentioning circumcision 10 times, none of these mentions relate to the Ashanti people. Now, I want to clarify that my intention is not to ridicule the Akans or Ashanti people. I am engaging in a critical reviewing of a book that appears to suggest a connection between the Ashanti and the Hebrews or the Israelites. Additionally, I aim to encourage individuals both in the Western world and on the African continent who share similar beliefs to reconsider their stance, as the available evidence may not fully substantiate their claims. In closing, as I stated before my submission, what an author decides to omit in their work speaks volumes. In this case, the author of Hebrewisms of West Africa omits this important Hebraic covenantal ritual when he argued for Hebrewisms among the Ashanti people. Why was that? Because the Ashantis, as I have demonstrated with sources, were not practicing circumcision. It was introduced by Muslim circumcision surgeons. It was introduced by intermarrying with the sons of Ishmael. Tra Omanye Amaah.